We are all wired for connection. Belonging is essential to our well-being. We thrive when we feel part of a community. But as we navigate life's changes, our sense of belonging can be challenged, no matter our age. So here's a question for you. Where do you belong? How do you cultivate relationships that truly enrich your life? Well, today, we're talking about the importance of social connectedness and how Arapahoe Libraries provides a space for connection at every stage of life.
This is a huge issue. It's a huge concern, this issue of chronic loneliness throughout the world and how it affects us physiologically, emotionally, mentally, and cognitively.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Hear from authors, experts, and opinion leaders to spark ideas, solve problems, and enrich your life. In Arapahoe Libraries, we turn every search for knowledge into a helpful adventure.
We have an exciting podcast for you today. It is a thoughtful conversation on the importance of social connectedness and discovering how simple shared experiences can help satisfy our deep longing to belong. Our guest today is a firm believer that staying connected is vital for everyone, especially when confronted with life changes, things like aging or caregiving, even the end of life. He has some unique insights on staying connected. We are thrilled to be joined by national writer and speaker, Jane W. Barton. Well, Jane, welcome to the Let's Find Out podcast. Tell us about your background and a bit about yourself.
Well, Mitch, thank you so much. And it's a delight to meet you today and to be part of the process of your podcast for the Arapahoe Libraries. This is an organization I have a real fondness for because I've worked with them for many years now. But I am an educational consultant by trade, and I've been doing this for probably about 2 decades now. I'm the founder of Cardinal LLC, and I have a rather checkered background professionally, which I own up to. I have a background in hospice and palliative care. I started that in 2004. I served as a hospice chaplain for about a year, and then I moved into the directorship of education for a palliative care institute here in the Denver area. And I served in that capacity for about 5 or 6 years before I launched my own company in 2011. Now, based on my apparent age, you're probably wondering what I did before that. And before 2004, I was in finance for about 3 years.
Wow.
And before that, my initial career was that of a petroleum geologist in the oil patch. And I did that for about 16 years, and most of that time was in management. So that's a little curious, a little quirky, and you may be wondering, how did I get here? Well, my passion for education and the topics that I present on, which are typically aging, end-of-life care, and caregiving, are rooted in my personal story. I was called to care for my mom when I was 15. She was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. And as a kid, I was pretty clueless because I was one of her primary caregivers, and I really didn't know what to expect. So my family and I, we gathered around for 8.5 years and cared for Mom until she died. And that has proved to be the formative event of my life because I learned so much in that process. And my greatest learning is this: knowledge is power. And without it, life can be pretty darn scary.
Yeah.
So today, whenever I speak, whenever I write, whether it's a local or a national audience, virtual or in person, I think about the audience and what holes in their knowledge base could I fill? What information could I provide? So when they're challenged by life, they can make informed decisions instead of merely reacting out of fear, because that never serves us well.
Right. Yeah. And given your background in so many different fields, you could have helped others in many different ways. What was it about the topic of belonging and social connectedness that really drew you to that and want you to share that with others?
Well, this whole concept of longing to belong and social connectedness and the challenge of social isolation in our country today, actually throughout the world, I tapped into a lot of resources well over a decade ago. I tripped over some information online talking about the loneliness epidemic. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And it was talking about loneliness, not specific to the aging population, but throughout the demographic scenario, from our first breath to our last breath. People of all ages are feeling incredibly lonely because they feel disconnected. This is a huge issue. It's a huge concern, this issue of chronic loneliness throughout the world and how it affects us physiologically, emotionally, mentally, and cognitively. And so I started presenting programs specifically to those who were aging solo, and then it's expanded for all individuals because we're all at risk of feeling a wee bit disconnected and having that subjective response of loneliness. And we know now, based on research that's been published in the last 5 to 10 years, that this is now viewed as a health risk factor that not only affects the quality of our life, but the quantity of our life as well. So it behooves us to recognize, man, I may be well connected today, but I'm not guaranteed of having a community 5 years from now or 10 years from now if I'm not intentional about making those connections and nurturing them.
Yeah. We hear sometimes people say at some stage in their life, I didn't feel like I was fitting in. But what I hear you saying is this is more than just fitting in. How would you describe what true belonging really looks like?
Well, this whole concept of belongingness
Mhm.
was presented in a research paper that was published in 1995. And it came out of Australia, two researchers, Baumeister and Leary, and they had a hypothesis of belongingness. And they said our desire to belong to a community, to another person, to a family, this is a psychological need. It's inherent for the human species. And basically, they were echoing many of the sentiments that John Cacioppo, a few years later, articulated in his book, Loneliness. He said that we as a species, we are obligatorily gregarious creatures, meaning we are inherently relational. So we're better together. We need each other and we want each other. And so if we're feeling lonely, that's a sensation that indicates to us something's missing. And it's just like thirst or hunger. If I'm thirsty, I need water. If I'm hungry, I need food. If I'm lonely, I need you. I need someone else in my life. So it's kind of a motivator to pay attention to that connectedness. But it doesn't just happen by being with other people, trying to fit in. In fact, if we're in a crowd surrounded by people that we have no connection to, it actually exacerbates our sense of aloneness. And I have witnessed this so often with many of the families or individuals that I've had the privilege to serve over the years in a professional capacity, those who have relocated to a long-term care community for health reasons. When they initially arrive in that community, although it's lovely, they're not connected to anyone there. And they feel desperately alone, even though hundreds of people mill around them. So fitting in is not satisfying. It's not gratifying. To belong means that we go with another person. That's what it literally means. We companion them, and we too feel companioned.
As you say that, people can feel lonely even when they're in a crowd of people. It makes me think of the advertisements that you see that say, oh, Austin is one of the best cities to retire in. And I think, yeah, it's a very nice town. Wait a minute, who do I know there? I gather that this sense of belonging, it might evolve or change through different stages of life. Is that right?
I think so. Our need to belong, I think, is pretty persistent and
Okay.
consistent. We know that from infants, the whole attachment theory, that babies, if they are loved, if they feel connected to a parental figure or a care provider, they have a greater chance of thriving and surviving. And we have that need, whether we are a young adult, we are into adulthood, or we are in our elderhood years. We still want to belong. But the situation, the circumstances will change, the environment that we find ourselves in. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that in this day and time, we live in a very transitory kind of society. So we move about, which means our communities change, our environment changes. And so we have to spend a lot of time setting down new roots and making new connections.
Interesting. And so are those challenges things like moving or retirement or maybe a loss in the family? Does that hinder our ability to stay connected then?
Well, it's and so much more.
Yeah.
And I think what makes the aging process so particularly challenging is that, let's say, after the age of 65, as we are into our older adult years, as it's described, we go through so many significant changes in a very compressed period of time. And so it's one transition after another transition, and we haven't dealt with one before the second and the third arrive.
I've heard you speak about the hierarchy of needs and how that might relate to our longing to belong. Explain that exactly. What is that?
Well, this emanates from the work of Abraham Maslow, a psychologist of the 20th century. And I would imagine most people have seen the pyramid of human needs periodically on Google or in textbooks. But he was well known to have identified the basic needs that we have if we are to thrive and flourish as individuals. And at the base of the pyramid are the more fundamental foundational needs, such as food, shelter, water, clothing. Then once we address those needs, we move up in the hierarchy and we start to think about our safety and security. And then smack dab in the middle of that pyramid is love and belonging. And he uses that term: intimate, important, meaningful, purposeful relationships. And beyond that, we have self-esteem and then ultimately self-actualization. Now, it's interesting to note some other psychologists today, contemporary academicians, they've reviewed Maslow's work, obviously, and they actually think that belonging, that sense of going with another, is more foundational and fundamental. They believe it belongs at the base of that hierarchy because it is so profoundly important.
Talk about the importance of connectedness. In that, a little earlier you touched on this, but I want to kind of expand on it. This really can Social connectedness can impact our mental state, even our physical health, right?
Absolutely. As human beings, we are inextricably linked to all dimensions of our being, so mind, body, and spirit. So if we are not feeling socially connected, if we don't feel as if we belong, if we are chronically lonely, mentally and emotionally, it makes us much more susceptible to diseases of despair, such as depressive disorders or anxiety disorders. Now, that also dials into our physical well-being. This is one reason why the healthcare system, when you go in for your annual exam, whether you recognize it or not on those intake forms, they are assessing you for social connectedness. They will ask you, do you live with someone? If not, how many people do you see on average every week? How often do you feel despairing and despondent? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Do you have any thoughts of self-harm? So they are doing that assessment, and many actually healthcare systems have programs. If they identify an individual that appears to be chronically lonely, they have a care plan for them. Because if we're chronically lonely, we know it's going to have an impact not only on the quality, but the quantity of life. It's been recognized that chronic loneliness has the same significance for our physical health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, having a poor diet, not exercising, not addressing high blood pressure or high cholesterol. So these are measurable things.
You mentioned that this idea of being connected is important for everybody at every stage of life. But how would social isolation impact, let's say, in particular, aging populations, and how might we prevent that from happening?
Well, aging is hard enough,
Yeah.
but when we're trying to do it all by ourselves, I think we have to have a different mindset, and we just need to be aware of some of the risk of becoming socially isolated. Because the odds are the majority of our population is going to be dealing with some chronic disease process. That is the cause of death for 95% of individuals in our country today. And so as we are dealing with a chronic progressive disease, we have an ever-increasing need of care. So if we are socially isolated, who is there to care for us? And the majority of us can't afford to hire all the care that we require. Plus, it's not what we want to do. When we're not feeling well, when we're declining physiologically or cognitively, we want to be surrounded by people who know us, people that we trust, people that we can lean on during times of trial and tribulation. So I think before we get to that point, we need to be very intentional to nurture community, to nurture relationships, and not just to be satisfied with lifelong friends, but always be planting seeds to initiate new friends and friends of all ages. A good life equals good relationships. Who you love, who has loved you. That's what truly matters. And that is borne out in 5 geographic locations throughout the world. They're referred to as the blue zones. You may be familiar with that term. These are populations, communities, where the majority of the members of that community live to 100 plus.
Yeah.
And they not only have longevity, they have an extraordinary quality of life. Now, Dan Buettner has committed his entire professional life to studying these geographic locations. He published a documentary in 2023 entitled Live to 100. And he came up with the secrets of living a long and good life. And the secret sauce, his term, for living a good life and living long, it's community. It's having committed, trusted, compassionate, caring relationships, those companions you can count on from your first breath until your last breath. So critically important if we are to age well.
You use the word intentionality, which I love because it kind of leads to my next question. Someone watching or listening to this podcast may be thinking, all right, Jane, I hear you. Now what do I do? I mean, what small daily habits can we develop to strengthen our social bonds?
First and foremost, we need, as you noted, to be intentional and attentive to everyone who crosses our path each and every day. And also to realize that when I go out and about on my daily routines, it's not just all about me. I need to focus on how can I be there for another person? How can I be attentive to them and their longing to belong? So a simple example would be when I go to the grocery store, and I usually go through self-check. I'm just picking up a few things, but more often than not, the little machine doesn't like me and I need some help, and somebody comes over and flashes their card. I always ask them, I say, how's your day going? And before they got accustomed to me, it was kind of shocking to them. They would look at me and they're like, what? And I'd be like, well, how's your day going? Well, it's okay. They really didn't know how to respond because most people don't see them and they don't hear them. They're not curious about them as a person. They're just getting their groceries and they're running out the door.
Yeah.
So now when I go into my grocery store, they all know I'm going to ask, and they're more inclined to have a little conversation with me because I care.
Interesting how those public spaces can help us engage a little bit more. So how might a library, for example, or it could be a community center, a rec center, other public space, how might that help foster a sense of belonging? How could we use those zones?
I think those venues and those organizations can be the gathering places. So they can afford the time, the space, and the place to create an opening to say, hey, come together. This is an opportunity to enjoy something. Maybe it's an entertainment opportunity or an educational event, or maybe it's a volunteer proposition. But it's a time for people to come together for maybe a common cause and then to find that common ground. And I think one of the best ways to overcome our sense of loneliness is to give of ourselves, to invest ourselves in others, to kind of get out of our own way and stop just thinking about me, but I can be focused on you or someone else. And so we broaden our horizons. So organizations like the Arapahoe Libraries, I know they have musical events in the summer. They have all kinds of craft events for kids. They have educational events, whether it's virtual or in person. But what I love about the programs that I've participated in over the last decade, they're also intergenerational. And I really get revved up when I interact with a variety of ages and I get to hear and see different perspectives. I get to learn from them and expands my understanding of the world. And maybe I learn a little bit about a different perspective. So maybe I become a little bit more understanding of people that don't think exactly the way that I do. And that's a good thing.
So if you had to leave the audience today with one key message about connectedness, what would that be?
I think I would sign off with an invitation. Invitation is this. If today you're feeling a wee bit lonely, somewhat isolated, disconnected from people in the world, I invite you to discover the courage within, to take the risk, to reach out and connect with someone, because it could change your life. It could change their life as well.
Yeah, great point. Well, Jane W. Barton, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. Some great takeaways for all of us to use today. Thank you for joining us for the Let's Find Out, the Arapahoe Libraries podcast. So where could people learn more about you? And you have a podcast.
I do. You can always check out my website. It's cardinallife.com. You can also drop me an email, cardinallife@msn.com. But on my website, you can access my podcast. You can look at a few videos, and there are also a list of programs that are coming up for the remainder of the year.
You made it easy for us.
I hope so.
I hope so. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely my delight and pleasure, and I wish you many, many blessings.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Let's Find Out, Arapahoe Libraries podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and visit us online at arapahoelibraries.org.